It's about this. All right, I think we are streaming live, and I will play it on the monitor there. So, welcome to HBTV, the second episode with me and Nick Soterakopoulos on this time the subject of why diplomatic talks to solve international conflicts seem never to work. And this is based on my personal irritation and anger over the fact that whenever there's a conflict, we hear all sides saying we need a diplomatic solution, not a military solution. We need to talk. We need to get people to the conference table. I remember hearing this all during the Vietnam War. The Paris peace talks were supposed to resolve everything and we would be able to get out and there would be no falling dominoes. Well, we did talk, we did get out, and the dominoes fell, and at least 20% of the Cambodian population under Pol Pot was exterminated. Plus, Vietnam became a dictatorship. So, and there were other repercussions, other falling dominoes. That was a failure. There were many times that we tried to build bridges to the Soviets. Nixon tried it. Uh, Kennedy tried it in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And Reagan tried it at Reykjavik. And I maintain that none of those was positive. All of them were negative. But as to why, we have to plunge deeper. So first I want to uh, welcome Nikos, and who's going to give a little pushback or devil's advocate.
Yeah,
Uh,
I will point out some situations in which I think that talks worked and that they can be a proper vehicle of proper foreign policy. But let's first hear your thesis and then I'll have my reply.
okay. I'm a philosopher. I start back at the basic principles of this of philosophy, and in this case, it's A is A, the law of identity. That means that the actions of an entity are determined by the nature of the entity that acts. That's the law of causality, which is the law of identity applied to action, as Ayn Rand formulated it. So you're talking with not an entity in the primary sense, but secondarily, what you would call an entity, a society, or leaders of a society. You're talking with individual people who are entities, who have a nature, and you're talking to them in their role of the leaders of a foreign power with whom you're in conflict. Now let's do something very unpopular. Let's talk about what the nature of the conflict is in the cases I'm concerned with. It's a conflict between a dictatorship and a free or semi-free country. So the Soviet Union was an absolute dictatorship, and the United States, particularly back then, was a predominantly free nation. Or we have today Iran, a dictatorship based on mysticism, worse than the Soviets, combining open, otherworldly, supernatural, revelation inspired dogma and brute physical force and gangsterism, a theocracy. And on the side of Israel, which is enemy number one, And the United States, enemy number two, you have mixed economies, basically good, decent, civilized societies under uh, uh, governments that have some limitations on their power through a constitution and political process and an ideology that, in theory at least, accepts the principle of individual rights, that the state does not own you, that God does not own you, that the power of government is limited by moral principle. And on the other side, you have pure evil. The Iranian regime is pure evil. It's, as I described it, mysticism with missiles. It's force combined with pure irrationalism. So, in a conflict between good and evil, how can talks resolve anything? Iran wants to kill every Jew in the world, starting with Israel, which is closest. Israel doesn't want to be killed. It's not that Israel wants to kill every Iranian or every Arab or every Muslim. They want to be left alone. The United States is not on a crusade to wipe out any particular religion. They just want to be able to have freedom of religion. They want to have freedom of thought, which includes both religion and atheism and any other set of ideas or primitive legends you stitch together. So it's in that sense a conflict of good and evil. So what do the good nations have to gain from bargaining with the evil nations? Well, we hope they won't kill us. That is not a good position to be in. And for the United States, which has military dominance over any country in the world, it's ridiculous. So talks are based on the premise that you have two decent, civilized entities who understand that killing for the sake of killing is not moral, it's evil, who understand that you don't kill someone because of his religious belief. You don't kill someone because of his political beliefs. You only kill in self-defense when when and if he has started using destructive force against you. So the good has nothing to gain positively from the evil. Don't kill me is not a gain. I'm already not being killed. So I want to give you something that I not be killed is trying to buy my life with concessions to the killer. What does it do to the killer? It encourages him. Now he's got two things. He's got the bargaining chip that you gave him in order not to be killed, and he's got your moral sanction, the second being more important than the first. You've now treated the killer as if he were a normal negotiating partner like another business. Ayn Rand once distinguished in a newsletter article horse trading from death dealing. She said that when Nixon went to China to make a deal, he was confusing horse trading and death dealing. You do not make a deal with someone who wants to destroy you, who is seeking to kill you, who wants to wipe you out. What would the deal be? All right, you can cut off my arm, but stop there. Or I'll pay you blackmail. like Obama did with Iran in that deal. Meaning, I will give you more power. I'll transfer some of my power to you in order that you not kill me, you not destroy me, you not strangle me. That cannot work. So, for a final overview, going back to philosophy, the focus for the last 100 years in international relations has been on process, not on content. That is, let's get a deal, let's bargain, let's jockey for position, let's encourage the ones who are not hardline and not called weakliners, I forget the term. The softer factions against the harder factions in the country. Let's do this dance. It's a process, it's an action, it's an interaction, it's a dialogue, it's a negotiation, it's a bargaining, it's talking. Let's get them to understand us so they're not afraid of us. To the exclusion of what is this entity? Process, the how, replaces content. The what? What is it? It's a nation dedicated to your destruction. In the case of Iran, death to America, death to Israel is chanted all through school and regularly by the populace, led by the government in that chant. That is not a joke. That is not rhetoric. That is the nature of the entity that acts. So the reason why the process philosophy has assumed dominance goes back to German philosophy and to the leader, the fundamental thinker of German philosophy, Immanuel Kant, in the late 18th century, who wrote and developed an entire philosophy based upon we only know the form, the process, the how. We can't know reality. We can't know the identity of things or of people. We can't even know who we really are. We're living in a matrix and we can't penetrate out to the real world. So don't bother about what is it we're dealing with. You don't know. Just have transactions. Just go through the dance. That's the best you can do. So Kantian philosophy has dominated almost 100% the intellectual world for 150, 200 years. And in international relations, it means forget about the nature of Iran, forget about the nature of Putin and his dictatorship in Russia. Don't call it a dictatorship. Just go through negotiations, bargaining, find a diplomatic solution. You can't. You can't succeed that way. That's my thesis.
No disagreement in a single word of what you said. However, I will claim that this does not mean that you cannot, for reasons that are to your self-interest as a nation, that you cannot negotiate or even cut deals. So naming an entity or judging that it's an evil entity, for example, Soviet Union is my enemy and I have to find a way to deal with them. This is a first step, but it does not tell you what the tactics should be when you deal with this enemy. In the same way that when you're in combat and you know that's the enemy, you can maneuver, you can go straight ahead in the attack. So judging that this is the enemy does not then dictate what your reaction to this enemy should be. Now, there are some cases where, because maybe due to your mistakes, the enemy is now so strong that going on a head-on collision with them would be destructive also for you, will be, in other words, self-sacrificial. And in these cases, you have to find a way to at least make sure that you minimize the damage by the fact that your enemy is so powerful. And I will give very quickly 3 examples. Once the Soviet Union became a nuclear power, the United States had to keep some form of communication, dialogue, however you want to call it, just to make sure that we know what goes on the head of these guys. And there were a couple of cases during the Cold War where things got at a very dangerous stage where a miscommunication, a lack of communication, could mean a disaster or a significant risk of disaster. The obvious case is the Cuban Missile Crisis, where at that point the Soviet Union has intercontinental ballistic missiles and also has at least two nuclear submarines at striking range of the United States, and in which case the first thing you need to make sure is that you don't put at risk hundreds of thousands of American lives. And I think historically the United States was vindicated by cutting a deal, if you want to put it this way, with the Soviets. And actually the Soviets felt so humiliated that 2 years later, Khrushchev lost his job. Another example was when Brezhnev took over the Soviet Union, the Americans smelt that this guy is not the same as the previous guys. This guy is not a true believer. So yes, the Soviet Union is still a very dangerous entity, an evil entity, but here you have a guy who is different from the other guys and is open to flattering, is open to living the good life, is open to some sort of deal which will weaken the enemy. So it is in your self-interest to keep a channel of communication with this guy. Even more, this happened with Gorbachev, which eventually was persuaded by reality itself, but also by Reagan and Thatcher and the relationship they had built, but that this is futile. And Mr. Mr. Gorbachev teared down the wall as he did. And the last example I will give was the deal between Israel and Egypt in the late 70s. So Egypt was the primary enemy of Israel. And the wars between Israel and Egypt had cost Israel something like 11,000 dead people in 25 years. Then again, they realized that Sadat is open to ending this or to put this conflict under hiatus, however you want to put it. Here we are 45 years later, and we've seen that this deal has meant that 2 generations of Israelis can go to bed at night being in a peace of mind that whatever happens, we're not going to be attacked by the most powerful military entity of the Middle East. So I claim in these cases, no matter what your judgment is that I have to do with different degrees of evil, and yet the self-interested choice was to make sure that there is a modus vivendi that will not lead to an escalation, because an escalation could be destructive also and mainly for you. So you do it for very self-interested reasons.
Okay, I disagree with every word you said. Can we just
Every
go on
word.
to another? Yeah, every word.
Okay.
Let's start what I wrote down quickly. You said you can, when you're confronted on the battlefield, this was your metaphor, and you know that that's the enemy, that doesn't tell you how to attack. You need tactics. Yeah, what I'm saying is it tells you not to send them, here's some of our tanks, here's some of our rifles, here's some of our ammunition. Will you now leave us alone? That's what it tells you. It does not tell you specifics. It's just like a right and wrong. If you know you want to be good, you want to, let's say, narrowing it down a little, you want to deal with other people in a way that respects their rights and treats them with recognizing their dignity as human beings, if they have earned that status. That rules out whole swaths of things. You can't kill them. You can't chain them up. You can't stab them. You can't take their property. You can't occupy their land. It doesn't tell you, should you buy a car from them, or should you hire them, or should you go to work for them? But it rules out whole categories. And the same way in the military, recognizing that you're at war and that's the enemy rules out whole categories. You don't run away unless you have to. You don't send them gifts. You don't pretend that they are not the enemies. Well, it's just let's build trust with the Nazis. Let's send a mission over. Now it's 1943. Let's send a mission of negotiators to deal with Hitler. They tried that at Munich with Chamberlain. Tried that. You, the fact it doesn't tell you concretely everything you should do. The purpose is to make a fundamental divide between these are pro-life actions, one of which we don't know which one it would be the optimal to choose. But these are anti-life actions, suicidal actions, and we know none of those are to be chosen. So the argument from we don't know the concretes doesn't show that we don't know a lot of concretes are out. And that's the purpose of principles is to draw broad distinctions among types of actions. And I'm saying we have to rule out any kind of concession to the dictator. And the subject of we need to know what's going on, you brought it up, which I would put under the heading of spying. You don't learn what's going on in Russia, say Soviet Russia, by sending a bunch of stupid diplomats to Moscow to be wined and dined by the ruling butcher. You find out by spies. And let me just attack the relativism that says we shouldn't have spies. They shouldn't have spies. They are the evil. Al Capone shouldn't have spies in the police, but the police should have spies in Al Capone's organization. Spying by the free countries against the dictatorships is a positive, heroic, moral, just thing. Spying by their side, like everything they do, is evil. So you didn't quite say that there's a moral equivalence of
No
spying, but
moral equivalence. Yeah, no
yeah.
disagreement. Yeah. But the
But you
point
say
is
we
that
have to know what's going on. Well, we didn't know what was going on. We had totally, and I lived through it, totally wrong view of what was going on in the Soviet Union, and the missile crisis is one example of it. Russia was always and is to this day much weaker than the US, regardless of how many nuclear bombs they have, how many missiles they have. They can't trust their own people, their own generals, their own equipment. Everything is made by people whose minds have been throttled. That's what dictatorship is, the throttling of the mind. And we are made, our material and army and so forth is superior because it comes from a free country where the mind is unleashed to create in the service of the good. So Russia was never a real threat to us. It was not a threat in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And we did not solve that by talking. It was solved by Kennedy properly saying, you've got to take those missiles out. He presented them with an ultimatum, or we will go and take them out. And they backed down. Now, after the missile crisis, he went in and negotiated and helped them to actually make some gains by what he conceded through the UN. But what he did, confronting them, was present them, get out of here or else. And that was a proper action for that split second of his reign. So I disagree that the missile crisis was in any way solved by negotiation. He went on television and he gave an ultimatum. He went to the UN and presented an
sorry,
ultimatum.
Harry, that was the beginning of the crisis. That was not the culmination of the crisis. That was the beginning of the crisis. They were 13 days
after
later.
he backed down, after Khrushchev, who was it, Beria? Who was in charge then?
Khrushchev.
It was Khrushchev. Yeah, after Khrushchev backed down, then they went in and gave it to the UN and made backdoor deals, which are improper. Maybe through back channels, they offered them the removal of the missiles from Turkey
from
before
Turkey.
they backed down, but they backed down. And
Well, also the
the
United States backed down from attacking Cuba, so it was a quid
yes,
pro quo.
yes, but we had no plans to attack Cuba. They were putting missiles in there, and we made them take them out. We had tried the Bay of Pigs, and it didn't work, and we had sort of washed our hands of that. So I see that Ayn Rand saw it this way too. A bully is a coward. And if you stand up to a bully with strength, he retreats. And that's exactly the analysis she gave of that. And I agree with it. But let's say I'm wrong. Let's say you have, suppose you're not the US, suppose you're uh, Monaco and Russia is threatening you with missiles. Uh, then it's not a case if you plead with them and offer them concessions, you're finished anyway. You probably should just stand up to them and try and get allies. But if you can't really, or maybe Monaco's too ridiculous, you're Germany.
Or
And
Finland, which was the real example in
yeah,
1939.
Finland. Yeah. So Finland fought back, but they lost. But they sort of kept the Russians out, and the policy of Finlandization was what they were forced to. If you're forced to back down, that's different from voluntarily a strong country saying, well, let's build trust. Let's get to understand that we mean you no harm. During the Soviet, you probably remember this despite your great youth. But during the Soviet Empire, the leftists said Russia is justifiably afraid of it's ringed by American bases all around the perimeter. There are these American military bases, and some of them have missiles. So they're understandably afraid. And some of them said, well, they're not understandably afraid, but they're paranoid. So we have to reassure them. Now, that is a massive evasion. The evil, of course, is afraid of the good. They're always afraid of the good, afraid of their own people. They are afraid of an uprising, of which there were many in Russia, which were not, in the Soviet Union in general, which were not publicized, but there were many. I'm not just talking about things like the Hungarian uprising and the later Polish one. I'm talking about ethnic groups within Russia, which would rebel from time to time, be brutally suppressed. That was not publicized in the West, but it occurred, and you can read about it. Oh, well, let me give you one little data point. See, this is the nature of evil. It's the nature of evil qua evil that this kind of thing happens. During World War II, a Soviet corporal, high ranking military corporal's not that high, is it? Colonel named something like Volokov led 200,000 Soviet soldiers to fight on the side of Hitler on the premise that however bad Hitler is, and they weren't fans of Nazism, can't be as bad as Stalin. Our real enemy is Stalin. We know what it is to live under Stalin. The Germans have bread. We don't have bread. So he led 200,000. I read about it in Solzhenitsyn's the Gulag Archipelago. You can look at, if you've got the book, look up in the index VO something.
And many Ukrainians joined the Nazis. So yes, it
Hmm.
was, some of them did it because they had no other choice. But yeah, this is true that many, or a significant amount of Soviets joined the invading Wehrmacht.
And this is in the nature of evil. People want to flee it. People want to resist it. People want to fight it because it is crushing them. It is making their lives miserable. I'll tell you one other personal anecdote. Solzhenitsyn's book, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, was made into a movie. And I saw it in a theater in New York where I lived at the time. After the movie, I went to a little restaurant, a little coffee shop across the street. And I heard at the table near me some people speaking Russian. So I butted into the conversation and I said, I just saw, um, I'm sorry, I got my stories mixed up. It was Moscow on the Hudson with a movie of Robin Williams, which begins, it's about the defection of a Soviet uh, ice skater, I think, to the United States. And it starts in Moscow, where you see long lines for rations. I mean, so long you cannot see where the line starts when you get on at the end. And these were endemic. These were absolutely omnipresent in Russia, but never spoken of, almost never spoken of in America that there were lines. You couldn't get food. It was after that movie where I heard some people talking in Russian, and I said, "Did you just see Moscow on the Hudson?" And yes, I said, I really liked it. They showed the lines in Moscow. I've never seen that in a movie before. I've never seen it publicized. And he said, it's not true. And I think, oh my God, I got a communist. It's not true. I said, what do you mean? He said, they lined up for chicken. When did we ever see chicken? And he was outraged that they implied that at the end of this line you might get chicken. So
Well, quite often people would queue up in a line without knowing what was at the
what's in the
outside because
yes,
they wanted to hoard things and store it for
yes,
whenever, because when else would they find again whatever is at the end of the line?
absolutely. And when Robin Williams got on the character he played, got on this line, he asked the person in front of him, "What is the line for?" And he said, "Toilet paper or chicken. I don't know." So it didn't matter. And people carried little string bags, which were called just
Yeah,
in case.
yeah,
And if they
yeah,
saw a
yeah.
line, they would rush to be on it. So that's the nature of the incredible poverty and backwardness of dictatorship. Dictatorships cannot produce, irrationality cannot succeed. So, in general, as a overview, if you're a free country of equal, roughly equal size and history of a slave country, you're going to be miles ahead of them. Your military is going to be miles ahead of them, and you don't have to fear them. Some other points of disagreement.
Can I give an objection to that? Can I give an
Sure,
objection to that?
sure.
Although it was from stealing Western technology, there's no question that in military technology there was a point where the Soviets seemed to have the advantage.
No,
Sputnik.
never, never,
Never.
not even close.
Who
Never.
who created first intercontinental ballistic missiles? Why
The
was Sputnik?
Germans, the Germans created it, and the Russians got some of the German scientists, and we got some of the German scientists.
Sure, but the Soviets were the first to test them, which is why there was all
No,
this panic in
no,
Washington. No,
we were the first. It was for space exploration that we did first, the Vanguard, which kept crashing. That was in the International Geophysical Year was, I believe, 1954. I'm pretty sure of that. And we started trying to send up satellites, but they kept crashing because the design wasn't right. After Sputnik, now you have to remember, I was 13 when Sputnik went up, and I was very interested. So I saw all these things. I know what happened. I followed it firsthand. After Sputnik, Werner von Braun went to Eisenhower and said, I can launch a satellite within 6 months. And he did. So Eisenhower said, go ahead. He used the Redstone missile. He launched a satellite much more advanced than the Russian satellite. And I'm having a something in my ear that's giving me competing information here. Um, I'm going to mute myself and close my video for just a sec.
Shall I give another counterexample while
No,
you
I'm
deal
no,
with it?
I'm here. I just want
Okay,
to follow up on that. Um, they got the technology from the West. Now,
hmm
granted, it was Nazis, but the Nazis were only in power for a total of 11 and a half years. And these scientists had been working before Hitler, Werner von Braun, before Hitler took power, and they lent their brains to Hitler, which they shouldn't have done. And then half of them went to the Soviet Union and they parasitized, as we did. We built air missiles, except for the Vanguard, which kept crashing from Werner von Braun and his team. Um, so their missiles, they had a lot of failures. You know, they didn't. It's not like they were ahead of us. They never got to the moon. They couldn't match our technology. They did by brute force and German missile scientists, which we did too at the start, but then we quickly developed Atlas, the Atlas rocket, and the moon mission, and all sorts of missiles that they don't have. And you see to this day the superiority of Western military technology to Soviet, and the world is
sure.
seeing that in this conflict.
So
So,
can I ask you
but you
point
raise
blank?
it.
Can I
No,
ask?
no, wait. I got to make a big moral point, Nikos, that is the apparent strength of the evil comes from the compromises of the good.
Sure.
There was a book written by Werner Keller in the 50s called East minus West equals zero, which was sold by the book service that Ayn Rand endorsed because it made them. And then there was a more scholarly study by Martin Anderson, I believe, in several volumes. All the apparent strength of the Soviet Union came from their supporters in the West who got them tremendous aid, foreign aid, and transfer of technology. For instance, all those communists on the Manhattan Project who gave the secret of the bomb to the Soviets, and the Ford Motor Company built a factory for them.
In
IBM
Nizhny
built plants
Novgorod. Yeah.
there. IBM built things there. The General Electric built a factory there. American business was motivated to trade, meaning to be nationalized ultimately, to be looted by them by a combination of unprincipled pragmatism, thinking, well, it's business, they're customers, they got things to trade with us, which they didn't. And well, isn't it a noble ideal that we're all working for the common good and the most vulnerable among us are being supported by the state? They're not allowed to die. So it was a combination of the Kantian moral philosophy, because Kant was the biggest backer of Christian ethics ever, and unprincipled. So to the extent they had principles, it was the meek shall inherit the earth. Let's go help the Russians. To the extent they didn't have moral principles, it was, well, who cares about theory? It's a market. We'll go after it.
And it was also the years of the Depression, so they of the Great Depression, so they thought that they would make an easy buck there, and they ended up either with their property nationalized or with their engineers arrested, and then they were basically hostages, and they would have to pay money. So yeah, there's no disagreement on that. But once you make these mistakes and your enemy is armed to the teeth and your enemy has like 3 million Red Army people ready to storm Western Europe, and they have a hydrogen bomb, and they have delivery systems, for me, it's inconceivable then to believe that you should cut all connection and all relationship with the enemy. And I'll finish with one example.
Mm-hmm.
The closest the world ever came to a nuclear accident, I mean, an accidental war, was in 1983, when, because of their crappy material, the Soviets mistakenly, their radar catches that there's an intercontinental ballistic missile from the United States. However, thank God, that particular Soviet officer knew that there's no way the Americans would attack us now because we are not in a war type situation. And second, he was clever enough to think if they would attack us, they would not attack us with one missile.
One missile, right.
One missile. So, but my claim is if it weren't the period where Brezhnev and Nixon normalized the relationship, there's a very good chance that that officer would actually believe, yeah, these people anytime now is going to attack us. And then who knows what would have happened. So I think when you find yourself in a situation where your enemy, through your own mistakes, is so powerful, you have to make sure that you create some modus operandi that at least you do not put yourself in existential danger.
It's called the telephone. You know, there was a lot of hay made by Nixon, or one of them established the red phone.
That was after Cuba, after the Cuban Missile Crisis.
You could pick up the phone and call. You don't need a red phone. You can pick up and call without a red phone. You can call on a regular black phone. No, I'm not buying into the whole powerful Russian. Look at how Putin. Here's one data point. Putin can subdue the Ukraine in 2 or 3 weeks. We were told. It's now 4 years, I believe, into it, and he can't do it. Putin couldn't really defeat Finland. The Soviets couldn't really defeat Finland. They couldn't defeat the Japanese and the Russo-Japanese. They are incompetent. Here's another kind of thing. Because life is so grim was so grim in the Soviet Union, there's tremendous drinking. The world's greatest drinkers are the Russians. Vodka is the mother's milk for them. And now I don't know this personally, but here's the story written by one dissident. They had jet planes in Vladivostok that were there to attack or defend their coast against our west coast. But they couldn't turn very well because the steering relied on an alcohol feed for the control mechanism. Like we have automatic transmission fluid, they had alcohol in it. And the pilots and personnel would drink the jet steering fluid when they couldn't get vodka. That's the nature of a dictatorship where life is crushed. They don't care. It's not like, they've got these strong Russian Stakhanovite warriors and their wonderful tanks. And so they're a bunch of incompetent clowns. Half of their missiles would have fallen on their own territory, as Iranian missiles have. I'm not saying that people wouldn't die. I'm not saying no communist regime can ever fail in a military operation against a free society. But the general picture is a strong nation confronting a posturing bully. How many times has Iran said in this conflict, because they're the moral equivalent of any dictatorship, any other dictatorship, how many times have they said, you're going to pay for this, America. If you attack us, watch out. We've got weapons you don't even know about, and we're going to blast you to smithereens. The famous case is Baghdad Bob. Do you remember Baghdad Bob? It was the media representative for Saddam Hussein.
Comical Ali, yes, of course.
Yes.
He was so
And
funny that he was even spared the prison because he was basically such a caricature.
uh, I'll never forget when he was saying, they were asking me, what about the approach of American tanks? And he said, what tanks? There are no tanks here. And a few seconds later, he threw down his microphone and ran away on camera because the tanks were just rolling in. Uh, that's what there's a lot of bluster from a bunch of drunken bullies who cannot get their act together against a free society. Again, that doesn't mean they can't ever do you harm, but it means that you are more powerful and you don't have to negotiate with them. You just tell them the way it is. And that's what should, rather than going to Pakistan to find a diplomatic solution to you want to kill us, we'd rather not be killed. Maybe we can work it out some. Rather than doing that, all he had to do is say, step down, give up the reins of power, disband the Revolutionary Guard, or we will kill you, every one of you, the leadership. And this is, an ultimatum is not negotiation.
Okay, since we are over time, one last question very quickly. So, am I to understand then that you think that Israel's peace deal with Egypt, and we see it now 4 decades later, was a mistake?
No, no, because it wasn't. I would reframe that as once Israel had humiliated and disgraced and overwhelmed Egypt in the 7 Day War and the Russia Yom Kippur War, um, Egypt knew they had no chance. You know the jokes that would go around at that time? What is the problem with the Egyptian tanks? They don't have any backup gear. They can't go in reverse. That was the problem with the Egyptian tanks. And Arabs have an Israeli surrounded and they surrender because they feel surrounded by the Israel. There was all kinds of jokes about it was such a colossal defeat of the Egyptian forces that they realized we have no future here. And it was good that they made I don't know. It's unnecessary that they finalized that understanding in a piece of paper. I don't even believe in treaties. I don't think a treaty is, unless it's over property lines between two friendly, rights respecting nations like the US and Canada. But a treaty with a dictatorship is ridiculous. It's a statement of intent, but either side feels free to break it whenever they decide they want to break it. Did you know that the October 17th massacre, one of the most horrific slaughters in the history of the world, was perpetrated by Hamas during a
Yeah,
ceasefire
yeah, yeah,
that
of
was
course,
then
of
in
course.
place? So, what is the point of, and now Trump is over there unable to get the Iranians even to lie. All he wants them to do is to say, okay, we won't build a bomb. Okay, you can go inspect the sites that we will set up that are not making the bomb, but you can't inspect the sites that we are making the bomb. All he all he wanted to do is lie, get them to lie. They won't even lie. They won't even lie to him. So it's ridiculous, and it shows the influence of moral relativism, subjectivism, pragmatism, denial that A is A and the good is good. That's my final word, and you get a final word.
My only final word is one of my favorite Cold War historical anecdotes. After Nixon gives all this, oh, we're such great friends to Brezhnev, Brezhnev actually believes it. So when Nixon gets in trouble with Watergate, Brezhnev tries to persuade Nixon, we can send you some KGB guys who's going to take care of this thing and nothing. It's as if nothing would have happened because we like you so much. Nixon declined, and yeah, we know what happened. What happened next? So the Soviets had actually believed the whole "we are now friends" story.
You can't. The police chief can't be friends with Al Capone. That's my slant on it.
Though if you send him enough love letters, Al Capone
Yeah.
might actually believe that.
Yes. Yes.
that
And foreign aid and all that. Okay. Well, thank you, and I look forward to our next meeting a week from today. So
all the
goodbye
best.
to everyone.
Thank you.